Experiences in Session. My guest tonight is Dr. Carl Lavie. His book is The Obesity Paradox. Dr. Lavie, welcome to HXP.
Thank you for having me.
So, Dr. Lavie, if you could just briefly get into your background, your education, help us understand who you are.
I'm a specialist in cardiovascular diseases. I did medical school at LSU in New Orleans. I did my medicine residency at Ochsner in New Orleans, where I am right now. And I trained in cardiovascular diseases at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, before returning to Ochsner about 25 years ago. I am the author of over 800 medical publications and 3 textbooks, including the Obesity Paradox book. The other 2 are books for medical specialists. And I'm a frequent lecturer, particularly in areas related to the prevention of cardiovascular diseases.
Okay, so let's dig right in. I mean, would you call this book controversial?
I think it is controversial, and in some ways, I think that the research that my colleagues and I have done during the past 15 years has been, in a way, revolutionary. And I think the results have been somewhat confusing. They've been surprising to me as a doctor, and in some ways have turned conventional wisdom on its head. But basically, our research during the last 15 years has pointed out that fat is not always the devil, and in fact, having a low level of fitness is much more important than body weight with regard to long-term prognosis.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. What are some of the modern and traditional definitions of obesity?
Well, typically, we define obesity by body mass index, which is simply calculations based on height and weight, and it's given in kilogram per meter squared. And using the body mass index method, the ideal weight is considered a BMI between 18.5 and 25. Overweight is 25 to 30. And obese is considered a BMI greater than or equal to 30 kg per meter squared. And mild or class 1 obesity is 30 to 35. Moderate obesity or class 2 obesity is BMIs above 35 to 40. And then severe obesity, which is sometimes called morbid obesity, I think that's a mean term, so I think we should really use the term severe obesity, is BMIs 40 kg per meter squared or higher.
So what in your opinion causes obesity? I mean, are there genetic factors as well as like predispositions as well as just eating poorly, lack of exercise?
There certainly are multiple causes of obesity, including genetic causes and even some very rare genetic disorders. But I think that in our society, by far, the leading cause of obesity, despite some people saying it's due to the fast food diets or due to sugar intake and the sugary beverages, my colleagues and I have published research that has demonstrated that the fundamental cause of the weight gain that has occurred during the last 5 decades is very marked declines that have occurred in physical activity. And not only does that lead to weight gain, but the lack of physical activity is also having a very negative effect on cardiorespiratory fitness, which is perhaps one of the strongest cardiovascular risk factors and predictors of long-term prognosis, and really affects the obesity paradox.
So how important is it to be physically active?
I think it's very important because physical activity is the strongest determinant of fitness. Certainly, there are some non-physical activity factors that determine fitness. Some people are just born with higher levels of fitness than others. But by far, probably 70 to 80% of fitness is determined by physical activity. And so fitness is probably the strongest of our cardiovascular risk factors. In fact, my colleagues and I have published a number of studies that show that a fit individual even if they have some disorders like lipid disorders, diabetes, hypertension, they often do better than the unfit individual who doesn't have these disorders. So fitness is a very important predictor of prognosis in our society.
But in your book, you pose a very, I mean, I guess this is the paradox part of it. And in my mind, when I hear the word obese, it's like a trigger. And I turn off, and I don't respond to it. But in your book, you say that being slightly obese is protective to the body, helps the body, and can prevent against heart disease.
Well, that's not exactly how we put it in the book, but and I like to say right now that my book in no way tries to promote obesity. We're not saying that obesity is a good thing. We're not saying that normal weight people should be trying to gain weight. But for those large number of people in our society right now, and the percentage is close to 75%, who are either considered overweight or obese, and the obese percentage is about 36%, it's not doomsday. For those people who have been trying to lose weight and have failed, or who have lost weight multiple times but gained it back, and are right now sitting 20, 30, 40 pounds over what they would like to weigh, they can still have a very good prognosis, especially if they fit. And I'd like to mention one very important study. It was by Catherine Flegel and colleagues. It was published in January 2013, JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, one of the world's most prestigious journals. And this study got a lot of publicity and a lot of negative publicity. But what it was a meta-analysis of 97 studies of over 2.9 million individuals. And it had a lot of statistical power because they analyzed over 270,000 deaths. And in this study, they showed that the best survival was in the BMI group between 25 and 30. This is considered the overweight BMI. They had a 6% lower mortality than did those in the BMI that was normal between 18.5 and 25. And the obese as a group had higher mortality. But it was all because of the more severe obese, because the class 1 obese, which is BMI 30 to 35, and that's the group that many people fall in, they actually had a 5% lower mortality than did the normal BMI. It was not quite statistically significant, but it was almost statistically significant. So all of the increase in mortality was due to the obese with BMIs above 35, and particularly those above 40. So the overweight group and the mildly obese group did not have a higher mortality. So it's really hard to say at this point in time that you will live longer if your BMI is in the normal range. Now, this study just assessed mortality. It didn't assess some other things that, certainly people, if they gain weight, are going to have worse lipids, worse cholesterols, higher blood pressures, more diabetes. So they may require more medications. The higher weight might be bad on the joints. So they may not have the best mobility as they get older. They might not have the highest quality of life. So there are other reasons to be thin other than just survival. But our data and the data of others is, I think, repeatedly showing that people can have quite good survival even if they're carrying a few extra pounds. And our data particularly shows that if you're fit, if you have a high level of cardiorespiratory fitness, it doesn't matter nearly as much what you weigh. Now, in a perfect world, I think everyone would be thin, fit, and metabolically healthy. But if you're going to lose some of that as you age, it would be much better to remain fit and gain weight than vice versa. If one maintains good weight but loses their fitness, they fall into a group that has a very poor prognosis.
Right, right. So, I mean, what do you think has led to this gross misrepresentation of what the human body should look like? I mean, there are people who are suffering from anorexia, bulimia, and their body image is poor. I mean, how do we correct that? What has led to that?
I think there are many reasons why one wants to be a lower weight, and it's not all health related. Certainly, a lot of the reason has to do with appearance and the way our society has glamorized being thin, and sometimes glamorized being really unhealthily thin. If you think of a lot of the models, they have extremely low uh, body mass indices, and a lot of times they have low muscle mass and are physically weak. And even though a lot of people say, would think that they might look very good in their bathing suit or in their evening gown, they may not necessarily be healthy at all. I think that a lot of it has been a perception of our society that thinner not only is healthier, which is certainly not correct, but that it is an appearance that they want to have again for their wearing clothes, the bathing suit look, and I think that that's a perception that goes beyond what my book is about. My book is about really the health aspects of weight and the fact that one can be very healthy at higher than the ideal body weights. And the vice versa. If you look at someone who's thin, a lot of people necessarily think that they're healthy. But the fact is, many thin people who are not physically active, have a low amount of muscle, and they're not fit, they're actually worse off than the heavier person, and especially worse off than the heavier person who's got a good level of fitness.
Well, I'm really glad that you said that your book is not an excuse for, being obese, but let's drive that point home. How do you draw the line between people that may think exactly that your book may be an excuse? Maybe they pick up your book and they think, "Oh, well, it's okay for me to be obese." How do you respond to that?
Well, certainly in every interview I do, and several times in the book, I clearly say that. But again, somebody can get the flash of the book, and maybe even though I didn't say it, maybe what they hear is that it's okay to be obese, or maybe they actually hear that it's good to be obese, and clearly that's not what I'm saying. I think in a perfect world, everyone would remain thin, fit, and metabolically healthy. That's not even close to what's happening in our society. And so, what I try to really pound upon is that fitness is more important than weight with regard to long term prognosis. And if you're fit, you can have a good prognosis almost regardless of your weight. Now, that's up to a point. At extremely high weights, extremely high BMIs, one, you probably override the possibility that fitness can totally protect you. But it's also not very common to have many people with BMIs in the upper 30s and the 40s to be fit. You can have a lot of people, though, that have BMIs between 25 and 30, and even in the low 30s, who are actually fitter than people with much lower BMIs. And what I mean by fitter is that we can measure fitness by a treadmill test, or many people will comment, in a road race, you'll see some heavier people running some pretty good times and passing up thinner people in the race. Now, again, maybe that heavier person would even be running faster and be even fitter if they were thinner. But the point is that even at higher weights, a person can have quite good levels of fitness, particularly if they're physically active.
Okay. So what is something that someone who is listening to the show right now can do? What is one thing that you would say or suggest that they can do to improve their health?
The biggest thing would be if they're not physically active to increase the physical activity. The goal should be for all individuals to be doing about 150 minutes per week or more of moderate physical activity, or 75 minutes per week or more of vigorous physical activity. And that's something that's very obtainable for many people because moderate physical activity is basically a fast walk. And so almost everyone can do 30, 40 minutes on many days per week of a fast walk. And so that's something that, number one, that most people can do. And if for some reason one can't walk because of their knees or their hip or their back, another type of aerobic exercise like an elliptical machine, a bicycle, and a supine bicycle, or swimming, or even water exercises, all would be ways to obtain that moderate level of physical activity, 150 minutes per week. That would be the number one thing. The second thing is that muscle is also very important. And one thing that obese people have, or higher weight people have, sure, when they gain weight, they gain fat. But generally, you don't gain all fat. You do gain muscle. So, for example, if someone gains 20 pounds, it's not all 20 pounds of fat. If someone gains 20 pounds and they're working out hard, a lot of it will be muscle. But even if they're not working out, they may gain 3, 5, 7 pounds of muscle. And so typically, heavier people have more muscle than very thin people, and vice versa. When you lose weight, you don't just lose fat, you also lose muscle. Now, if you lose weight while you're doing a lot of exercise, you may maintain your lean mass or your muscle mass and mostly then lose fat mass. But most people, when they go on a vigorous diet and lose a lot of weight, if they're not exercising, they're not going to maintain the weight loss usually anyway. But the weight they lose is almost all combination of fat weight as well as muscle weight. And so to prevent that, if you're doing physical activity, including resistance training, doing some light weights 2 or 3 times a week, particularly for older people, is a very important thing as a way to preserve muscle mass that's typically is declining as we age.
Yeah, very interesting. So, Dr. Lavie, there's a chapter in your book called "The Purpose and Power of Fat," and if we could just close on this, I think it'd be interesting if you could go get into that.
Well, first of all, fat is a reserve. And so, if someone knew they were going to catch a bad disease, a cancer, or develop bad heart failure, or have HIV infection, or some types of bad muscle wasting connective tissue diseases like advanced rheumatoid arthritis and other diseases like systemic lupus erythematosus, or bad kidney disease like chronic kidney failure. It would be good to have more fat as a reserve to fight the illness. And so for some severe diseases, the heavier person is actually better off than the very thin person who has very little reserves when it comes to fighting some of these chronic diseases. But there are some other potential things that fat could be doing that is beneficial and protective. And we've shown that in our patients with heart failure and coronary heart disease, that having higher levels of body fat have actually correlated with better survival. And so again, I'm not trying to promote anyone for purposely trying to gain fat or to gain weight. Almost anyone would benefit from increasing muscle mass, particularly for the thin person who's got very low muscle mass. But almost everyone would benefit from muscle mass. But certainly, patients who are thin, who are underweight, people with BMIs, officially underweight is BMIs under 18.5. But a lot of people think in our current society, people have BMIs even between 18.5 and 21, 22 range. They're pretty low weight. And for many of those people, not only having more muscle mass, but probably having a little bit fat would be beneficial for their long-term prognosis and survival.
Okay. Well, Dr. Lavie, I certainly appreciate your time, sir. Thank you for being here. Where can people find more about your work, buy your book?
Well, we have a website on the book called obesityparadox.com, and one could also Google Lavie Obesity Paradox. Lavie is spelled Lavie, and Lavie Obesity Paradox, and can see a lot of material. But again, the website obesityparadox.com would have a lot of information.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here, sir. This is The Human Experience. We are going to get out of here. We will see you guys next week.